a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the road trip edition. I'm John Bonus of Choose Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of TheAthletic.com.
Where in the world is Johnny San Diego?
John Bonus is in
Philadelphia?
The border of Center City and South Philadelphia right now.
It's a little too specific for me, but okay. Let's go with Philadelphia.
Just Philadelphia, right?
Center City or City Center?
Center City.
No, I don't like
They
that
call
either.
they call their downtown Center City.
Yeah. Is that like by the terminal market?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the only place I know.
That's where you've been. Yeah, I know.
I eat my pork sandwich once every 10 years. I go there.
Sandwich. I think I did call that out in yesterday's story on Twins Daily about 9 things you must do if you come to the Twins Phillies game. I think I called out the Nick's pork sandwich.
Yeah,
that was a late edition.
I read that John's Guide to Philadelphia. It was very funny. It's very funny that things John. I would be no different. Believe me, it would just be like, here's the best Chinese food in Philadelphia. Yours was like, here's the bars that stay open late. Here's where you get a sandwich after hours.
Yeah.
And it was like, hey, here's an art museum if you're some kind of weirdo or something. But yeah, John's in Philly. You were also in Detroit, which I'm going to blame you for that whole series, basically.
Yeah, exactly. You're also going to blame me for the other night when you got lots of texts from the beat reporters.
Yeah. I'm sitting at home. What was it? The first Wednesday?
Yes, Wednesday night.
Like 11 o'clock Central Time, and I get a text first from Dan, and he said, hey, thanks, man. And I was like, what? And then I got a text from Doe, and he's like, hey, cheers, man, I appreciate it. And I'm like, and then the one that really got me was Betsy, who doesn't drink alcohol, was like, hey, thanks for the round. And I was like, no, Bonus bought everyone beers on the Gleeman and the Geek card is what happened there.
And then you got one. And then you got one more.
Yeah. And I got one from Cody, our Tigers writer, who I didn't even have in my phone. So I was like, well, now they're just picking up strays.
Did he identify himself?
No.
Perfect.
Said, I'll read you the text. I'll read you all these. These are not. It was, hey, thanks for the drink. That's it. Just from a 806 area code, which I have no idea what that is. But our Tigers writer, Cody, who's a great guy, I'm happily buy him a drink. And then about 15 minutes later, Dan texted and said, hey, thanks for the second round too. Really appreciate it. I've joked about this before, but it's not really a joke. John is a very generous man in general, especially when it comes to buying drinks, but there is no one in the history of the universe who becomes more generous at buying drinks than John Bonus once that Gleeman and the Geek credit card comes out. Because here's why. He gets full credit for being nice.
Yep.
And only half pay.
That's right.
And as a little bonus, it hurts me a little bit too, because I'm not there and I'm just paying for it and I'm cheap.
Here's the best part about this story. I didn't have the Gleeman and the Geek credit card.
Oh, you guys were just screwing with me.
I bought a round and I said, I'll buy a second round, but I don't have the Gleeman and the Geek credit card, but we need to make Gleeman think he's paid.
Yeah. Well, those Detroit alcohol prices are just going to wreck me. 2 rounds.
So I said, all of you need to text Gleeman thanking him, and we're going to do it the rest of the night. We're going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
I just want you to all keep texting him every now and then. Like, I love that one. And I said, oh, and you, Cody, he's not going to know who you are. Here's his number.
Yeah. It's good. It was funny. I feel better that I don't actually have to pay it. I'll figure out a way.
I know you'd feel better today.
When it comes to
it was just an oversight. I'd left the Gleeman and the Geek credit card in the room.
Yeah, good. You shouldn't be able to travel with this thing. That's dangerous, John. You should only get it should activate when I'm within 500 feet of you. That's the only time it should really
I'm going to have to see if there's a credit card service that does that.
Yeah. Because otherwise, I'm waiting.
We might have to get you chipped. Is that okay? Like a dog?
Microchipped?
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the day where I just walk into like a bar or a restaurant and I go up there and I just see somebody, hey, put that on Gleeman and the Geek card. And I go, what? Wait, what? And then I just see Bonus like in the corner doing the circular hand thing of like another round for everyone. Yeah. Like it doesn't even matter if I'm there. Yeah. And then at the end of the year, when we do our year-end financial review, because we have an LLC, which sounds absurd, but yeah, And John sends me the spreadsheet, and it's like, expenses, $100 for hosting, the podcast, and $25 for this, and we went out to lunch a couple times. $4,200 in alcohol. And it's like, well, I haven't had a drink in a year, so but yeah, fine, I'll pay half that. But that's the price you pay to keep your frequent guests and Cody happy. You know what I mean? Like,
that's exactly right.
We got to keep them. We pay them to come on the show, which I'm very proud to say we do.
Right.
Not most shows don't do that. I'm proud to say we're in a position to do that. And yeah, you buy them a drink in Detroit, and that's why they hang out with John. Really, everyone likes to joke that they like John, but really, that's
right. It's mostly about the free tabs. Right?
It breaks out the credit card. Okay,
and Wednesday night we had lots of good reasons to drink. And frankly, if we'd have gone out Thursday, and I picked up, we went out for dinner yesterday too. We'd have had lots of good reasons to drink then too.
I'll be afraid when you take some people to like Ocean Air back in town and whip out the car. I can handle a few post game beers in Detroit. That's my price range. Yeah, we've talked about this. I feel like pretty much all season, but it's more. It becomes increasingly frustrating when the stakes of the game and the stakes of the season are rising at this point.
Right.
But since last we spoke, they swept the Arizona Diamondbacks at home. Yeah. I was there for those. And not to say Arizona is an impressive team. They're kind of in a free fall, but they're a 500-ish team who have some star players. And you think, and coming off that sweep, they were 4.5 up on Cleveland. And or were they 5.5 up on Cleveland? They were
5.5 up on Cleveland after the first game versus Detroit.
Right, which they won. So they go Tuesday to Detroit for a 4-game series, and they win the first one with an offensive explosion against a lefty. And you're thinking, wow, they're riding high now. They're up 5.5 games, which was their biggest lead in the division since the end of 2019.
Right.
Cleveland was still struggling just to get to 500 or even get near 500. They were losing guys to injuries. Jose Ramirez is knocking out Tim Anderson, all that stuff. And you just think, but finally the Twins are in position now to take advantage of the schedule gap between them and the Guardians, start to put together, multiple good series in a row, which we just haven't seen really all season. And instead they do what we joke they do all the time, which is, I like to say, step on a rake, right? Which is they go and lose 3 straight in Detroit. And it was very reminiscent of about 2 weeks ago when they were on a pretty good stretch and they get swept in Kansas City 3 in a row.
Right.
And it's like, how many times do you have to see this from the same team in really the same circumstances, where it's not like they won 8 or 9 in a row.
Right.
They just put together like 4 consecutive good games at any point, and it's like, all right, that's all we need to really see them, step way out in front of Cleveland and distance themselves. And then they just fall so flat, and they just lay such an egg against. They went now since the All-Star break. They're 1-6 against Kansas City and Detroit. I mean, that's embarrassing. These are 2 teams, and for the whole season, I think they're 4-7 against Detroit. I mean, this is not a good team. Kansas City is even worse, obviously, but it's this team gets criticized like before the bad things happen a lot, I feel like.
Right.
And then
they live up to it.
Right. And then we sit there and we go, let's, pump the brakes on that. And, they're in good position, and maybe let's see what they do with the rotation and blah, blah, blah. And then they just live up to, it's almost like they're trying to live up to the criticism in some of these cases. And yet, despite going 1-6 against 2 of the terrible teams in baseball and losing 3 straight in Detroit after winning the first one, they are 3.5 games up in the division with 45 games to play. Their only opponent, Cleveland, is still not even to 500 yet.
4 games under 500.
And is, had made themselves worth at the deadline, which we talked about last week, and all this stuff. And it's just like, it feels such like almost 2 separate teams, because there's the team you watch and the team that keeps falling flat and the team that cannot handle 1 ounce of success without backsliding 2 steps. You know what I mean? And then there's the team that you look at the standings, or you look at, the projected playoff odds, and you go, oh, they're up 3.5 games. They're 90% to make the playoffs.
Right.
And it's becoming like, my brain is like it's like warped my brain in terms of criticism and praise. Right. You know what I mean? Like it's just so tricky to try to balance the reality of the situation they're in for the division and ultimately towards getting to the playoffs. And realistically, they could be 5 games, 8 games, 10 games better than they are right now. And their path to the playoffs, they'd probably be 100% instead of 90%,
Right.
but they were still going to end up with the 3 seed most likely, and they were still going to play the last wild card. And yet, so it's hard to balance that reality. And it, by the way, when you watch Cleveland, it's even harder because it's like, this team is not good.
Right.
I've watched a lot of Cleveland. And yet you watch the Twins, and it's like, I can't imagine a more frustrating team. There's no more frustrating way to be like 3 games above 500 for 4 months than to be like, it's not even win 1, lose 1, win 1, lose 1.
No,
it's like win 4 out of 5, get swept by the Royals, win 5 out of 6, lose 3 in a row to Detroit. And it's like, God, what a maddening combination from the same team.
Right. No, it's I was going to say, it felt all season like it's been 2 steps forward, then 2 steps back. And now since the All-Star break, it feels like it's 3 steps forward and 3 steps back.
Yeah.
It's actually become more frustrating watching this team because they go on better winning streaks that make you start to believe more and more. And then they lay complete eggs versus teams that they absolutely should be beating up. And, it started again facing a left-hander, and that was a good left-hander on Tuesday. Wednesday's game, though, Wednesday's game swung on 2.1 innings from a left-handed reliever, right? It was when Holton came in and the bottom of the 6th got the last out, which was Kepler versus, granted, a critical situation. I think bases might have been loaded, at least runners on first and third. They get Kepler by bringing in a left-hander. Okay, well, that happens, right? But then they just keep him in. And this is a I don't want to say journeyman, but kind of a journeyman from the Diamondbacks who ends up pitching the 7th and 8th inning. Then, after he gets out of the 6th, why not? Let's just keep him in there because he's a left-hander and they're facing the Twins, right? And then even yesterday, which only had 1 inning pitched by a left-hander, it was the highest leverage inning of the game. It was the 7th inning when it was 1-0. They bring in the left-hander, and again, just some mediocre left-hander who's got a 4.5 ERA, 5.5 ERA. He comes in, he shuts down the Twins for a big inning. It's the same criticisms we've seen before, that the bats sometimes just go in a complete funk for days at a time. It's often precipitated by having left-handers. Close game, you get to highish leverage innings and you end up giving a couple runs in the 7th because you don't have enough arms in the bullpen. It's been frustrating. It's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. Nothing has seemed to have changed.
I agree with that. And it also, I'm like I was joking a minute ago how it's tough to kind of compartmentalize the bad play versus the good position to get into the playoffs. I think what you just said also adds to the, frustration or confusion or just being sick of it. Like you like to say about players, freezer burn, which is I'm sick about talking about how they can't hit lefties.
Right.
Like, believe me, we're sick of it, but should we not talk about it? Like, I know people are like, well, you guys, we're going to talk later about how bad Joey Gallo is. I know people are sick of hearing that, but it continues to go on. I know people are probably sick of hearing us say, oh, they're, 1 or 2 short in the bullpen, but it continues to be an issue. So we're going to continue to talk about it. With that said, though, they also got shut down by a righty recently.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Which was also a very frustrating game. He has a 0.79 ERA now in 2 starts against the Twins, like 12 innings, and a 5.50 ERA against everyone else. I actually think he's a decent young-ish pitcher, so I'm not saying he's a bum or anything.
Right.
But they got a tendency to make. righties and lefties at this point.
They had a couple of golden opportunities, literally with guys on third base with 1 out, with Julian and Jeffers, who are the 2 guys you want up right now in this thing at the plate, and both of them. I think Jeffers struck out on 3 pitches, maybe a fourth, maybe 4 pitches. And Julian also struck out. And
the inability, we talk a lot about how the negative aspect of a strikeout is exaggerated by most people. And I know people are watching this team and Joey Gallo.
But this group has made the most of them.
Right. There is a point at which you get so extreme, the Joey Gallo point, where you're just essentially making it impossible to be successful when you're striking out, 45, 48% of the time. You're only giving yourself half of your plate appearances then to do something with, and he's struggling even within those, obviously. But then from a team-wide perspective, they're on pace, I think, still to break the all-time strikeout record. There's a difference between saying, don't get so caught up in strikeouts when they're, 7th in the majors or something.
Right.
Versus, well, they're literally going to strike out more than any team in the history of baseball. Well, yeah,
Right.
that's an issue. And so, but where strikeouts do matter situationally, and people tend to place too much emphasis on this and act like these are the scenarios that happen most often, but these are the scenarios where it does matter, is what you just described, which is there's a runner on third base, and literally putting the ball in play will most likely score that runner.
Yeah. I mean, Detroit didn't even have the infield in on both of those. Right.
And just the inability to do that, and the inability to even just put together competitive at bat. Like you said, it's not like it's a 3-2 count and they foul off 2 pitches and then take a borderline one for strike 3. I mean, these are just not even competitive at bats a lot of the time with a runner on third. And I don't know, it's that situational hitting, and it's stylistically not what they're built to do.
Well, and you don't want Rocco overplaying that either. Like, you don't want him trying to have Ryan Jeffers, who's the hottest hitter on the team right now, try to lay down a bunt or do a sacrifice or something.
Although they have done that.
It's probably played differently if it's Michael Taylor up there or Willie Castro up there. Or
Jeffers has done 3 of those this year. He was talking to us last week.
Oh, that's right.
About how proud he was to be him and Taylor are the 2 bunters.
Yeah.
And he's like, I didn't expect that, honestly. Nobody looking at me.
But when he's in the middle of a 13-game hitting streak and you're like, this is the guy that's tagging it all over. We got a chance to put up a crooked number against this guy. Let's not try to scrape by for one run. And,
I agree.
And that's, like I said, that's exactly who I wanted up in that situation. And then it came around again, and it was Julian up. And you're like, who did, by the way, take a borderline called third strike on that.
There's a weird... There's almost like a refusal or an inability to recognize the spots where you don't have to be perfect, where you don't have to maximize your advantage, where it doesn't need to be a 2-1 or 3-1 count, where you're going to get the best possible, hitter's pitch. You can just go up there and look for a strike and hit it hard somewhere. And they just seem to have so much inability or struggle so much to take that mentality, even in certain circumstances during the average game. They just seem to constantly be in the mode of, I'll take all these borderline ones because I want to get 2-1, 3-1, and then they're going to throw me a meatball, and then I'm going to crush it. Except A, they don't really crush meatballs, and then B, half the time, guys like Correa and Julian, they take meatballs right down the middle. And I looked this up this morning. They lead the majors in strikeouts, so it would stand to reason that they're going to lead the majors in swinging strikeouts and looking strikeouts and any kind of strikeout you're going to do. But the numbers on looking strikeouts or called strikeouts, however you want to call called strike 3, are shocking. Like they've not only do they lead the majors in looking strikeouts, they've taken 40 more called strike 3s than the next highest American League team, which is the Mariners. 40 more, and 76 more called third strikes than the average American League team. I mean, that is shocking. And
how many are they at? What is that, 40? Is that 10% more? Is that 5% more?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I mean, it's an absurd number. And they also lead in swinging strikeouts. That's equally, frustrating, obviously. But there's so many at-bats, and Correa is super guilty of this, which I wrote about yesterday. We could talk about that later, maybe. I kind of went stat by stat through his horrible season and tried to figure out where it's coming from. But I mean, there were a couple Buxton ones before he went on the IL that shocked people, where he just went up there and took 3 pitches down the middle and went and sat down. Correa seems obsessed with getting into a hitter's count and laying off borderline pitches, and he's constantly upset with the umpire, like he was in Detroit. There were multiple where he's just scoffing at the umpire, and yet he'll just take a 2-2 pitch right down the gut. Or swing, by the way, at a pitch in the other batter's box on 3-2 or something like that. And so it's really strange to watch a team that seems, and this has been a Rocco Baldelli complaint all season, seems incapable of in-game adjustments. Like, once a guy like Reese Olson gets through 2 scoreless, you can almost go, oh, here we go again. Their plan against this guy wasn't the right plan. We recognize that in the second or third inning. Detroit is now leaning into their successes on this and throwing even more sliders or throwing even more whatever it is. And the Twins just go up there batter after batter with the exact same plan and take the exact same strikes. And it's just mind numbing to watch, particularly when then once every 5 games, they just explode for 9
Right.
runs, and you go,
Right.
yeah, what is this? Like, how is this possible? And I really, it's so deep into the season, and like you pointed out, this issue is among a handful of issues that have been season-long issues, truly, from day one.
Yeah.
And I can't sit here and say there's been any progress made, really. I mean, they're hitting better than they did in the first half.
Sure.
In part
I think on Monday's game they said that this team is leading the majors in runs scored since the All-Star break.
Well, that ain't true now, obviously.
I can't believe that would be.
They've been shut out twice since
later,
then.
right? Exactly.
But even that, the fact that could still be true. I'm sure they're still in the top 3 probably in the second half. And yet you've been shut out in 2 of the last 3 games. Kind of speaks to what we've talked about all season, which is the average or the total in terms of runs does not represent what this offense has actually provided in terms of run support. Because if you score 9 and then you score 0, you can only go 1-1 in those games at best, basically. Right. And yes, you're averaging 4.5 runs per game, but you're never going to win both of those games. And that's, an extreme version of what we've seen all season, which they'll explode for 12 runs.
Right.
And you'll go, all right, here we go. And then they'll have a 3-game stretch where they score 4 runs. And it's just like, and yesterday was such a perfect example. Kenta Maeda was great yet again, has been great pretty much every start since coming off the IL. He's got a low 2 ERA. He's got a ton of strikeouts in, about 50 innings, something like that. And he made literally 1 bad pitch.
Yep.
And it got hit 1 billion feet by Riley Green, who's like the only really good hitter in Detroit's lineup. Right. And it's going to be a huge pain in the ass for the next 10 years in the AL Central.
He's impressive.
He's just a phenomenal player. He gives up a solo home run in the 6th inning, and then that's it. You get a loss for that. You made literally 1 bad pitch. And an otherwise, and that's, again, an extreme version, but we've seen that play out constantly where guys will go 6 innings and they'll allow 2 runs, or 6 2/3 and you allow 3 runs. And in a normal circumstance, after these games, you'd be talking about how good the starting pitching was yet again.
Right.
But when the lineup scores 0 or 1 or 2 runs, it's like, well, Maeda, I guess he shouldn't have made that 1 bad pitch. Right. And that's just an impossible, kind of expectation to hold over a pitching staff, particularly when the rotation is, showing some signs of leaking oil a little bit.
Yeah, right.
A couple of the guys.
That's right.
Since we'll do our first ad here in a second, but since the last pre-show, they put Buxton back on the IL. They claimed Jordan Luplow off waivers to replace him on the roster. And they transferred Brock Stewart to the 60-day IL, which means he won't be back before August 26th, which was unlikely anyway. And then they sent down Giovanni Moran. So that's just sort of state of the roster. We'll talk about some of that stuff. But first, you like that segue, John? That was
sure. Let's talk about Harry's Razors. I am fortunate enough to be in my travel case, my Harry's Razors razor. And the reason I have a good one in my travel case is because about a couple months ago, they came out with this new craft handle set of Harry's Razors. I said, that looks cooler than the one I have, and it's still cheap because everything at Harry's is very affordable. And so I grabbed it, and then I threw my old one into my travel bag. And it's and now I've got all the convenience with Harry's Razors, whether I travel or whether I'm at home. And I have it, those conveniences include things like, it gets mailed to me, so when I never have to run out of razors. And they're half price. They're $2.
Here's what you get in the in that craft handle travel set. You get the craft handle blade, or the razor itself, has a 5-blade German engineered razor cartridge. You get the shaving gel, and then you get, like you said, the travel cover. So you can take it, and that has a $17 retail, and you can get it for $10 by going to harrys.com/Gleeman. That's HARRYS. harrys.com/Gleeman to elevate your shave with the latest and greatest in Harry's razor handle lineup today. Our next sponsor.
And then the other thing that happens when we come home from these trips is we have no food in the house. So what we also do on that is we schedule a HelloFresh delivery shipment to be showing up the day after we get home. So the day we get home, we'll order pizza or something like that. But the next morning, HelloFresh shows up with their assortment of meals, and suddenly we are good to go for the next week. Chrissy doesn't have to worry about when she's going to the grocery store. Everything is all kind of planned out for us. And of course, HelloFresh has everything, bagged and ready for you to go. Like, here, you're going to have a hamburger with candied carrots on the side. And in that bag is all the things that you need to make that hamburger with a side of candied carrots or whatever, including the carrots pre-portioned. And
yes,
the
it's all portioned out.
Make, and
it's all fresh ingredients portioned out. And then even for doofuses like me who really can't cook, there's a recipe, but it's such a step-by-step with pictures, which helps.
Right. Yes.
So that whether you kind of know what you're doing, like John and Chrissy, or you don't know at all what you're doing, like Aaron and Becky, we've used HelloFresh, and we've come up with Instagrammable meals, even though we really have no ability to do that on our own. If you go to HelloFresh.com/50 Gleeman, that's 50 Gleeman, and use the code 50 Gleeman, you get 50% off.
50
give you
Gleeman,
50 50% off. Not 50.
Okay,
you're right.
Yeah.
I have faith in our audience figuring that out.
Yeah.
But the reason it's 50 Gleeman is you get 50% off plus free shipping. So that's HelloFresh.com/50 Gleeman 50 Gleeman to get 50% off plus free shipping. It's HelloFresh. It's America's #1 meal kit. Okay. I don't know. You want to talk lineup first? I guess there's a bunch of stuff lineup wise. We sort of talked about it already.
Lineup is the topic because the team isn't hitting. So let's start with lineup, and then we'll get to the
Solano. They're still sort of waiting on, what the end game is here with his knee injury. It looked like an ankle injury at first, but he had an awkward kind of sliding back into first base on a play.
Looked terrible.
Yeah, looked bad, and they sent him for an MRI right away. And I'm thinking, oh no, it's a torn whatever.
Right.
And I honestly did not think I'd be sitting here in mid-August being like, they can't afford to lose Donovan Solano, but that's where we're at. I mean, he's played well. They haven't hit well. They haven't hit well right-handed.
Yeah,
he's one of their few guys that have been.
Well, as soon as he left the lineup is when that slump started, by the way.
Oh, okay. But he appears to have avoided a substantial injury, but he hasn't played since then. Obviously, he remains on the active roster. I think probably tonight's going to be the do or die because they tend to, because you can only backdate IL stints 3 days now. You used to be able to backdate them 7, I want to say, back in the day, but you can only do 3. And so that provides sort of a decision point a lot of the times with the Twins. We've seen it with Kepler. We've seen it with Buxton. We've seen it with other players where you let it linger for 2 or 3 days. And then on that third day, after that third day, when you can no longer backdate it and have them return, in 7 more days instead of 10 more days, that tends to be the point where they're like, all right, it's do or die here. So I think we're probably going to see that with Solano, certainly during this Philly series, but they can't really afford to lose him. The other thing though is, in terms of right-handed hitting infielders, Royce Lewis is rehabbing at AAA. He's played twice. He homered in his first game. He's playing third base so far. It's fun. He's playing right next to Brooks Lee. Yeah. He's playing shortstop. Although it should be noted that Lewis played 1 rehab game, hit a homer, got a scheduled day off the next day just because they're bringing him back slowly. And when he got the scheduled day off, Brooks Lee started at third base. Which is only the second career game he's played at third base in the minors. The previous one was at AA when Lewis was rehabbing with them, and he played third base for earlier in the season. So
they're taking this third base thing seriously.
Yeah, they're prepping everybody for third base.
Right. Yeah.
I think even if Solano goes on the IL tonight, let's say, which will hopefully be a minimum-ish stay. I mean, I'm hopeful he stays on the active roster. It's just we've seen this story before. I don't know that they would let that, alter their plan for Lewis's rehab necessarily, especially with an oblique injury. It's not just a matter of getting at bats for Lewis. It's more a matter of having him swing a bunch to see if his core muscles and this oblique muscle can kind of handle it, or if there's another setback here or whatever. But you could potentially, if you were going to put Solano on the IL, you could potentially just activate Lewis, and that's how you replace him on the roster. I mean, they're sort of limited. Jose Miranda is still not ready. Obviously, Kirilloff is still not ready. Buxton is still not ready. There just aren't a lot of, we talked on the Patreon podcast about you could just call up someone like Kyle Garlick or Chris Williams, who's a more traditional first base, righty bat. Kyle Garlick has been playing some first base. He can play the outfield, obviously, too. They could do that. That would require a 40-man roster move, but that's doable. But just in general, hopefully Solano doesn't need to go on the IL. But if he does, they're just in such a weird position now, roster-wise, where the easiest to play position, well, I don't know about easiest to play, but the position at the bottom of the defensive spectrum, which is first base,
right,
where the Twins have thrown Luis Arraez and Miguel Sano, and just, in season, they've put guys there and said, just learned it on the fly. And it's, for the most part, gone fine, really. I mean, that's going to be the spot where they have the fewest playable options.
Right.
In part because the guys keep getting hurt, obviously, with Kirilloff and Solano, etc. In part because Joey Gallo, who you would coming into the season, they were like, well, he'll just play first base.
Right.
He's fine defensively, obviously, but he just has been so bad offensively that doesn't really help you that much, and certainly doesn't help you against lefties. But then the other thing is that for whatever reason, they have refused to use first base, kind of incorporated it into the defensive flexibility of all these guys. Like Ed Julian, I've hammered this point home, but very oddly has not played any first base. Right. Even guys like Larnack or Wallner, these 6'4", 6'5", slow-footed, big corner outfielders, have not played any first base.
Right.
And so you're now down to Gallo and Luplo has played some first base. By the way, the only reason they're comfortable playing Luplo at first base is because the Tampa Bay Rays, his previous team, just gave him a bunch of reps.
17 base. Starts there.
Right, when he was 27 years old, which is something the Twins are refusing to do with other similar players. But anyway, and so I wonder how they will handle that. I think it's a very weird situation to have too many infielders and too many corner outfielders, but not enough first basemen. Logically, that you very rarely run into that, just because you would say to some of those guys, okay, you're playing first base now. And maybe they will ultimately come to that. I mean, I just, if Lewis is back, you can use the DH spot until Buxton is back. But then what are again, this is probably a problem that will never happen. I guess, why am I cart before the horse?
Right.
This idea that once Kirilloff's back and Buxton's back and Lewis is back, that'll never happen. But,
I will tell you, as somebody who ran into a lot of Twins fans after the Detroit game yesterday, right?
Yeah.
People want to talk about, is there any hope of them doing anything in the playoffs? And, after a loss like yesterday's, nobody thinks there's any chance of them doing anything in the playoffs. Fair enough, right?
Of course.
But then a beer or so in, it's like, but Lewis is coming back, and Kirilloff could be coming back. And,
I mean, it's true.
Buxton comes back healthier after this extended rest. And, it is one of those things where it's similar to the highs and lows we talked about, sort of the first segment here, right? That you still sit there and look, and say 2 months from now or a month and a half from now, this team could be, a lot healthier and a lot different than it is right now, except that you keep waiting to see the upward trend, right? That's why we get so excited about the upward trend, right?
I feel like there are two problems with that premise, which I agree with you. I mean, we talked about a month ago, I say, for about half the show,
this
maybe
in May and June,
about the idea of, yes, you can judge the current product, and you can judge relative to how they're playing and relative to their playoff chances and all that stuff. That's obvious. But, with guys like that was right when Kirilloff was coming back. And it's well, let's, the goal is to get him healthy so that the lineup or the team you put out there for game one of a playoff series can be, and often is, vastly different than the one you put on opening day, or even June 1st, or even August, or even September 1st.
Right.
And the goal is, how can we sort of, like you just said, kind of build towards this? But the problem there is, there's been really no progress on field that you can point to necessarily. I mean, they've been
and when you do see progress, it's immediately you see the regression as well.
B, within that, Buxton's hurt, Kirilloff's hurt, Solano might be hurt, Royce Lewis still hasn't come. There's still a ton of injuries involved here, and some of them, like Kirilloff, is hardly guaranteed to be healthy enough to be in the game one lineup, let alone be healthy enough to return and get some reps and actually build back up to that. But then here's the other thing I'll say. Pitching is part of that too.
Yeah,
and the idea, you can have a really good final numbers for your rotation And the Twins will. I mean, they're going to end up as one of the 5 best rotations in baseball, almost surely at the end of the season. Except Joe Ryan now is not in a position to be penciled in for a playoff start at the moment.
Yep.
Bailey Ober is leaking oil all over the place, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so now it's like, well, okay, the same, I guess, optimism that you could have placed on the lackluster lineup and said, look, yeah, it's not great now, but if they can put out what they really want to put out there lineup wise for game 1 of a playoff series, it can be formidable. And yeah, sure.
Right.
But the flip side is, well, everybody spends time of who's going to be the 3 playoff starters. Right. They have so many options. Well, I don't know if they have so many options at the moment. A lot can change, especially on the pitching front over the next we said the 6 weeks.
Thing. About this same time last year, we were getting out of the trade deadline. We're like, listen, they've got all the pieces in place now. And then they immediately get hit by injuries. Or you start wish casting for, this reliever is going to come back, or, this left-handed, we're going to get back that right-handed bat or something like that. And then suddenly Donovan Solano goes down. You're like, hold it. Right. That's right. It goes both ways, actually, the last 2 months of the year. And with the Twins, it actually doesn't even necessarily go both ways. It just
goes no ways.
It goes.
It's a no-way street. First, no city planner has ever invented that, but it's a no-way street. I mean, with pitching especially, the greatest pitching staff in the world, it doesn't do you any good if they all are hurt by September or they're all, just struggling by September or whatever. And I'm not saying the Twins are a mess in that regard, but a couple of their guys that they were counting on to be in this mix are showing signs of wearing down or are injured currently. And you're still counting on Maeda to make it through the next 6 weeks and all that. But, and like I said, Kirilloff's not close to returning. Buxton doesn't sound imminent to return, and he's got his own issues even when he does return.
Right.
Now you have Solano, which is a potential worry. On one hand, with like Buxton, there's no reason to rush him back at the moment. Not that that is ever really a possibility for him, but there's no reason to rush him back when you're basically cycling Julian, Wallner, and Jeffers through the DH spot, and they've all been pretty damn good. I mean, they certainly out-hit Buxton for this year. But and that sort of goes into something we've talked a decent amount about all season, and is really, I feel like, coming to a head with Gallo and with Buxton and even with Polanco to some extent once Lewis comes back, which is how much are they going to continue to kind of give the benefit of the doubt to the veterans?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have said that was really their MO in past years or just in general as a front office. Because they've certainly incorporated plenty of young bats. But if you think about this year, I mean, here's a crazy stat. Their 5 highest OPS plus this year among guys who have, more than 100 at bats or whatever are Jeffers, who's 26 years old, Wallner, who's 25, Julian, who's 24, Royce Lewis, who's 24, and Kirilloff, who's 25. I think those are the 5 youngest guys on the team. They've been the 5 best hitters on the team. Yeah. And yet you look at it.
That's super encouraging, right?
Yes. Long term, that's encouraging.
Right.
But here's the question I have within that. Jeffers started the season in a backup role, had to fight his way into a timeshare by out hitting Christian Vasquez by like 300 points of OPS. And even now is, still starting about half the time behind the plate and getting some DH at bats mixed in. Wallner, I mean, we've spent endless time talking about why can't Wallner get a shot? Now he's in the lineup and they're talking, Baldelli loves him. But, for the past 4 months, it's the only shot he's gotten when 9 guys got injured and then he immediately gets sent down. Julian only really got an extended look because Polanco went down. They sent him up and down a couple times. And now Royce Lewis is coming back and it's kind of unclear where he's going to go. And so my question is, like, maybe this is silly to say without the injuries, because with the Twins, there's always going to be injuries. But without the injuries, would we be viewing their willingness to kind of turn this lineup over to these young players who have ultimately been very successful and productive and have carried them for long stretches? Without the injuries, would a lot of these guys just be at AAA right now and we'd be like, man, the lineup kind of stinks and they have all these good bats at AAA. So are we kind of giving them credit for incorporating all this wave of young talent, which has thrived, when really their hand was kind of forced in that regard, and they're still sort of hesitant in some cases to do it. But so that's why from this point forward, especially once Lewis comes back, I'm very curious to see what is the timeshare behind the plate,
Right.
Are they willing to just say, look, I know we owe Vasquez 30 mil, and he hasn't been terrible lately by any means, but
No,
who are we
fine.
kidding? Jeffers is the better player right now, obviously.
Right.
And might be on both sides of the ball. He's certainly the much better hitter.
Right.
You know, Wallner cannot be removed from the lineup at this point. Julian, to me, cannot be removed from the lineup at this point. You know, they're going to incorporate Royce Lewis, hopefully. Royce Lewis, the question is he going to play over Polanco some days? Or is Polanco going to force him or Julian to the bench? Polanco has not looked good at all.
No,
offensively or defensively since coming off the IL. And so whether it's Gallo and the corner bats, whether it's Polanco and the infielders, whether it's Vasquez versus Jeffers behind the plate, I am very curious to see how willing they are to not ignore the veteranness and all that, but to say these young guys are our best players right now. And they have been when given a chance for months. Are we really going to, live or die? Are we really going to sink or swim with, Vasquez and Gallo and Polanco playing over Julian and
honestly,
Lewis?
I think they're at the point where they recognize they don't really have a choice, right? Where, like you said, they can't send Julian down. They're not going to cut his playing time. They're not going to, you still won't see him versus lefties on a regular basis, right? But he's going to be in the lineup versus right-handers, right? Or if they do cut his playing time, they're also going to be cutting Polanco's playing time. Do you know what I mean? It feels to me like it's not going to be any more than a share situation, a 50-50 share situation. Whoever's, you're going to get some guys with days off or something, but they're just in a race right now. And, you can futz around with that and wait for the veterans to come back in April and May and June. But I will be shocked if this organization doesn't, but in August and September, their attitude is not, listen, we need to score some runs, and these are the guys scoring runs, and you're not scoring runs. So
will you be shocked? You're saying, I agree with every ounce of what you're saying right now. We are 100% on the same page, which rarely happens. But it does sound more like wish fulfillment. It sounds like what you and I would do.
Yeah.
Yes, that is what I would do. But I don't know. Would you genuinely be shocked if Joey Gallo continues to play over fill in the blank?
No, Joey Gallo's outside the conversation in my mind. I will be shocked if Joey Gallo continues to, like, when they have a competent first baseman back here. I think Gallo's head is on the chopping block at this point. But to be fair, I've thought that for a month.
Well, this is what I'm saying. We can say these things,
but there's been enough injuries. There have been things like the Kirilloff injury or the Solano injury or something like that makes it a little bit more, palatable to still keep Gallo on the roster someplace, right?
Well, but that's kind of what I'm saying is that a lot of their decisions have been driven by these sort of, the decision gets made for you because of roster availability or injury availability. My point with Gallo at this point is he can just be cut and find somebody who's better. It's not Larnach or Chris Williams or Garlick or whoever.
Yeah.
He's been so bad now for 3-4 months. Like, it doesn't need to be in reaction to something.
Right.
Vasquez, I'm not saying he's a useless player, but you're saying, well, April, May, June, it's one thing. Well, we're in mid-August and he continues to play half the time. I mean, there's no objective way to say he deserves as much playing time as Ryan Jeffers at this stage. And so that's kind of what I'm getting to. And then I really think it will come to a head. And again, this may all be moot because the odds are somebody will get hurt right when someone comes back or whatever it is. But I guess with the infield, you can use Julian at DH. Certainly.
Right.
And then you can play Polanco at second and Lewis at third, but they're also going to want to use Jeffers at DH. They're going to want to use Wallner at DH. And so my question is more, are there going to be games, against a righty, let's say, that you're going to sit Royce Lewis to play Jorge Polanco, even though Jorge Polanco has not performed to the level of deserving that consideration for quite a while now? And is probably not as good defensively at third either. Are there going to be games, if and when Buxton comes back, where he's going to play over somebody who would be a better DH option because he's Byron Buxton?
Yeah.
Are there going to be games down the stretch where Vasquez is starting and you're saying, why isn't it Jeffers here? And individually, you can make arguments on both sides, but there's like 3 or 4 of these spots now that are in play, assuming guys come back from injury. Again, this might be a moot point where you're like, we keep saying, you could probably build a whole show full of clips of us going, well, it's just April. Well, it's just May. Well, now it's mid-August.
Yeah.
So there's no waiting. It's either the decision gets made now or it doesn't. So when Lewis comes back, which I would expect to happen, let's say in the next week, I mean, it could happen right now, but within the next week, if and when Buxton comes back, certainly if and when Kirilloff comes back, they're going to have too many bats for the spots. And yet the offense itself is not particularly great, which means you're not doing a good job of kind of deploying those bats or divvying up the playing time among those bats. And so that's one of the biggest questions I have for them. And I'm not, I don't want to sit here and criticize them before they've actually done that.
Sure.
Certainly their actions through the first, 4.5 months suggest that they're giving a lot of weight to what they thought would happen coming into the season and for veteranness, as opposed to what has actually happened in the season, with underperforming veterans versus overperforming or just good performing rookies. And to me, that would be a tremendous shame if you were to not, maximize this team, especially offensively, when all the good young guys that you're counting on for the future have pretty much all stepped up every time you've given them even a sliver of an opportunity. And almost all of the veteran guys that you brought in to be good just haven't been good.
Now, I think your point's a good one in that, in almost all of these positions, for instance, Jeffers and Vasquez, but now we can look entirely around the infield at almost all of them, that there's going to be, it's not just this guy's going to be there full time or this guy's going to be there full time, right? It's a knob that you can turn, right?
It's a dial. Yeah.
It's a dial, right? And it can be I would not be surprised if we spend the next 6-7 weeks of the regular season wishing that knob was turned a little bit more towards a rookie.
Right. That's
versus veteran. You know what I mean? Like, not a lot, but there's going to be a couple different times when things go bad, we're going to be like, maybe that knob should have been turned a little bit more towards rookie. Like maybe it should have been just twisted to another tenth of a spot there. Maybe that Tuesday start should have gone to the seventh start of the week should have gone to Jeffers instead of Vasquez, something like that. Yeah,
I think that's a good way to say it. And I mean, I'm not calling for these guys to get dropped from the roster, although in Gallo's case, it probably will be. But yeah, that is what I'm saying. Is I'm saying just when it's a coin flip in your head,
right?
Maybe err on the side of, well, these young guys have been pretty good and these veterans have been pretty mediocre or bad. And I'm not sure that I believe that's how they'll turn that dial. I would love to see it.
And right now, it's not as big of a deal because they have a lot of flexibility. Because you say the big question is going to be when Lewis comes back, and I think that's true. We're going to see something. We're going to see that's going to be one of the. But the real one is going to be when Buxton comes back.
Right, I agree.
Right, because once Buxton comes back, you can't give Jeffers any. Well, are you still going to give Jeffers some spots at DH and still have Vasquez there? But if that means sitting Buxton. Or are you going to, you're going to have Julian or Wallner not playing DH or not playing?
Right. It helps even when Lewis comes back. If they have the DH spot open, you can alleviate a lot of this pressure or a lot of this, dial turning just with the DH spot. But yeah, if and when Buxton comes back,
right,
that removes that from the equation. And then Buxton himself is sort of precisely what we're debating here, which is, yeah, it seems absurd on opening day. If you were to say they're going to be in mid-August, they'll be in first place. You're not going to want to play Byron Buxton some days.
Right. Yeah.
But that's sort of what I'm saying is they need to, there seems like there's a lack of, we talked about the hitters not making adjustments mid-game. I would argue that the front office has not made adjustments mid-season. They literally didn't trade for anybody at the trade deadline, but they seem so entrenched in the notion that the decisions we made coming into the season have to still be the correct decisions. And in some cases, their patience / stubbornness with Pagan and Kepler have been pretty valuable, and they've been right. The other day I said to Derek Falvey, You let me know whenever you're ready. You can take your victory lap and I will eat crow and we can turn that into an article or a podcast. And he said, let's wait a little bit. And then that night, I think Emilio gave up the tying runs or something. So I thought that was good. But I've offered that opportunity to him. This is me eating crow. Let's see how it plays out, obviously. But I worry with Gallo and with Vasquez and with Buxton and with some of these other decision points, if they're just still grasping or grabbing to the idea of the team we rolled out there on opening day was the right team with the right roles. And no matter what's happened in the last 4 months, we're still kind of sticking to that. So I would love to be wrong. Maybe I will be wrong. Obviously, Correa is a big part of that. I think we should talk a little bit about Correa more specifically. But first, this is my new segue that I just keep doing. but first, let's talk about RotoWire
and football season coming up here.
Surely many of the people listening to this watched the Vikings preseason last night, and you are preparing for your...
Did you, Aaron Gleeman?
Yeah, although I fell asleep I'm an old man now.
I did not. I was on a flight, so
I watched a little just to hear my guy PA.
But it is fun to start dreaming towards the football season. We've got some tailgates scheduled and some other things like that. We're already looking at tickets and such. But also,
you're going to have a lot of drafts, I'm sure. If you're listening to this. Some people
that is one of the things that we have also had. Who's going to be the commissioner for our football team this year? For our football league this year, we had.
So here's an opportunity. If you have fantasy football drafts coming up, you can try the Gleeman and the Geek free trial at RotoWire, which is rotowire.com/Gleeman. And when we say free trial, let me tell you, it's a real free trial. They won't even ask you for your credit card. It's not one of those 7 days free and that it charges you $1,000 or something like that. Yeah, right. Because they're so confident, and John and I have both used them for a long time.
Yes.
They're so confident that you will like the product that they're willing to let you use it for free. And you can draft all your teams if you want. You're not tricking them. They're letting you do that because they're confident that you'll realize what a superior product it is, not just for fantasy football, but for fantasy baseball and just baseball in general. I use it all the time, their player news, to go look up somebody's injury history or transaction history or whatever. And player news notes are invaluable because they keep an entire database where you can essentially go back through a guy's entire career and look up every bit of news that was ever posted about him. And so whether you wanted...
And then you can, all of the news on all the players is updated all the time. They are that which supplies people like CBS Sportsline or something, their player news, right? So I can guarantee you one of the things that the people who win your league love is when you show up at the draft with like a magazine from January that says, here's the top quarterbacks or something like that. RotoWire, you've got the up-to-the-date information on, this guy's been hurt or this guy just dropped in the depth chart. You do not want to get him. He is not worth what you thought he was. And all that stuff is updated like day by day by day. You're going to be the most prepared person on the draft.
Fully customizable cheat sheets.
Yes.
You can customize it to your league settings and all that.
Right.
So just go to rotowire.com/Gleeman for your totally free trial. And then last but not least, Game Time, which is the Game Time app. We've talked about this before. The idea behind Game Time is hard to find tickets, not just for sporting events, but like concerts and shows and stuff, and also last minute tickets, which really comes in handy. John uses it. He's at whatever bar stool. It's 25 minutes before the first pitch at Target Field. He says, all right, pay the tab. Let's start walking.
How do you think I went to the game versus the Tigers?
That's right. In Detroit, it works.
Right. Yeah.
You punch up while you're walking to the ballpark if you want. That's how last minute it can be. You get the Game Time app. You go looking for tickets. Super easy. By the time you arrive at the ballpark, you can have the tickets on the app and just use them. And if you download the Game Time app, you create an account and then you use the code Gleeman, you get $20 off your first purchase. So terms apply. But again, create an account on the Game Time app.
That's right.
Redeem the code Gleeman for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price.
Yeah. Go grab that app now. Do a little prep, and then you're all set to go for next time you'll need some tickets.
So I wrote, we don't necessarily have to go too far into it, but I wrote a big thing about Correa yesterday, just about his season-long struggles, B, like tried to really kind of dig down into him and say, is this bad luck? Can we pinpoint 2 or 3 things that he's really struggled with that are maybe worrisome for a 28-year-old? And then also I tried to figure out, how often does a 28-year-old who had a 138 OPS plus last year go to a 91 OPS plus this year? How often does that even happen to a 28-year-old? right in the middle of their prime.
Yeah, that is considered to be like the year that is going to be a career year for people. Right?
It's shocking. I mean, from 26 to 30 is generally like your prime as a player.
Right.
And so I looked up all that stuff. So I thought a couple points were probably worth talking about. I know a lot of people have probably read the article. Not John, though. He refuses.
I've not.
He's boycotting my article since 2006.
I'll get there. I've been busy. I've been traveling.
Yeah, that's why. What about the previous 400 articles? The shockers are when John one day will be like, "Hey, I read your article," and I'll be like, "That's the one for the season, huh?" But so here's a few just kind of the nuts and bolts of what I found digging deep into his struggles, which I will say, can we definitively say that his confidence level didn't really mean nothing? Is that fair to say, John? That was in May, by the way.
I think the confidence is getting back up there.
Yeah, getting back up there. About time we have Dan Hayes. I guess that was a Patreon podcast. If people are unaware, one of the dumber, longer arguments, and that's saying something for this show, was we had Dan Hayes on the Patreon, who I love. Dan's the best. He's a great guest, too.
Yes.
And he was talking about Carlos Correa. Yes, he was off to a slow start, but he had confidence, and he was confident that things were going to turn around. And my point that I tried to make, I made it very poorly, was, well, that doesn't really matter to me. It matters to Carlos Correa, but to me, whether or not he had confidence, it doesn't affect the odds I place on him bouncing back necessarily. And we had a way too long argument about that. And then Correa got on a decent stretch, and then he slumped again, and then he got a decent stretch, and then he slumped again. And now here we are in mid-August, 3/4 of the way through the season, and he's got a 695 OPS. He's got the worst win probability added on the team. He leads the league in double plays. And again, who cares about his confidence level? I will give him credit, Correa, not Dan. I give Dan no credit for anything, much like I give you no credit for anything. And I would only expect you two to not give me credit for anything, too. That's the way it works.
Right,
but
yeah.
I will give Correa credit. I guess I could read the exact quote, but I will read the quote. So we talked to him at the end of the homestand just about his struggles. And here's the one quote that I thought was really good, this is Correa. He said, "I've been struggling all year. That's no secret. I'm not going to put my head down and give up and just say, I'll come back next year and I'll do it for the next 5 years or so. For me, I'm not thinking about I've still got 5 years to put up numbers. I'm thinking figure it out right now, put in the work every single day." Well, yeah, that's precisely what you would want someone to say.
Yep.
And then the other thing he said was, here's another quote, "My mentality is just to go out there and figure it out every single day. Keep working and finish strong. Then hopefully we make the playoffs and you can go off there and it'll all be worth it." That's all true.
Right.
These are all.
That's all exactly right.
I think in crisis, he gives great quotes. I go back to when they booed him at Target Field earlier in the season, and he said basically, we were like, "Are you mad at the fans for booing you?" And he said, "Oh my God, no! I'd be booing myself too if I made this kind of money and I was hitting the way I do." Like, he's very good at when push comes to shove and the situation is bad, whether it's a team, whether it's him, whether it's some outside thing, of basically giving you a quote that is very reasonable and logical and shows a sense of self-awareness and all that. But the problem at this stage, it's not his work ethic. It's not his want to. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I'd actually suggest maybe part of the problem has been his work ethic.
Well,
the fact
right.
that
Maybe
he is starting all the time at shortstop. He's never taking a break. He's been dealing with plantar fasciitis on this part. So no, I don't think it's his work ethic is the problem.
Right. The idea that he's just constantly trying to find numbers and find scouting reports that can help him break out of this slump is an admirable trait in general, but that hasn't changed. I mean, that's been the case for his entire career. And so the struggles are within that. But so a couple points, you can react to them or whatever. But, to me, the two most worrisome aspects of it for a 28-year-old especially is he has stopped hitting fastballs, which he has destroyed fastballs like most very good players.
Right.
You don't become an all-star in the majors if you can't hit a fastball. I think for his career, he was something like 310 off fastballs. Last season was like 330 batting average off fastballs. This year, 223. The expected numbers aren't much better. And then within that, when he swings at a fastball, he's swung and missed 14% more often than last year, which is, to me, it seems like a very bad sign for a 28-year-old who's still supposed to have bat speed and all that stuff. And then within that, we talked a little bit earlier about the whole lineup in this regard, but he's at the forefront of this, is just pitches down the middle, just either taking them for strikes in a baffling way, it's often for strikeouts. And then when he does swing, just hasn't been able to do the damage on him. And, you know, we call middle pitches, but Baseball Savant classifies, you know, middle of the zone pitches as meatballs, quote unquote.
Right.
And the league as a whole pounces on a meatball. I mean, that is one of the keys to hitting is you stand up there until you get a meatball, and then you try to hit the crap out of it.
Right.
And the league as a whole swings at 76% of middle pitches, which are classified as meatballs. Carlos Correa has swung at, I think, 62% of them, which is even 10% below his low-ish.
It suggests he's not recognizing the meatball when it's a meatball.
Or he's so obsessed with trying to get into these favorable counts and to try to grind out these quality at-bats that they're starting him off with a first pitch fastball down the middle, and he's just taking it. And often with 2 strikes, he just seems to be guessing. And just somebody will throw him a slider down the middle or even a fastball down the middle in the zone, and he'll just take it and go back to the dugout. And it's baffling to me. Also, you know, when he does swing at it, he just hasn't been crushing those pitches that you need to crush, really. And a lot of them have been hard hit, but double plays, which is part being a right-handed hitter, part being slow, and part hitting the ball hard, but not in the air, which is what you need to do to crush them. And then the other thing is, within on fastballs, his average exit velocity is down 2 miles an hour on fastballs, which kind of links to what I'm saying, which is he's swinging through a lot more fastballs this year. He's taking a lot of pitches down the middle for strikes. And then when he gets a fastball and he takes a big hack at it, he's either grounding into a double play or he's just hitting weak fly balls because there isn't the same oomph or the juice behind these. And, you know, could that be just randomness? Could that be bad luck? Could that be a bad stretch? Absolutely.
I mean, it could be a million things, right? It could also be he's been looking more for breaking balls, or maybe he got the sense that they were going to give him more breaking balls, or maybe they're giving him more breaking balls in general, and so therefore he's keying on those. He's a little slow on catching up to the fastball or recognizing the fastball because he's looking for something. Or it could be that he's, you know, tired from playing every day at shortstop. It could be the plantar fasciitis that we know that he was, you know, on the IL for is, you know, screwing with his swing a little bit. You know, it could be a lot of things. No, it could also be, he just got old at 28.
That's the worrisome. That's the red flag to me.
Right. That's the worrisome one.
That isn't what I would bet on necessarily.
Right.
Because he still looks really good defensively. I do think the injury component, we often talk about this when there's a massive drop off, kind of unexplained. Very often afterward, you'll find out, oh yeah, this guy was playing through this injury. Right. And we know he's playing through plantar fasciitis. And so maybe that's affected him more than he's let on. Maybe the lower back problems that he had early in the season has affected him more than he's let on. Maybe he's just worn down, like you said. But
we know once Kyle Farmer went down with that pitch to the face, right? He played every game at shortstop all the way through, the entire time. We know soon after that was when we started hearing about the plantar fasciitis. You know, also since that time, like at that point, it has been clear this lineup needs help. You can see where he would be taking that pressure upon himself, both in terms of I have to be out there playing, I have to be performing. But, you know, also just the mental, like I'm trying to lift everybody up. I'm trying to, you know, like team leaders take that crap personally. And the fact that the lineup has been a problem all year and he's, you know, the leader of the hitters at least. Yeah. Right? He's not just that might be reflecting on it as well. I don't know if this is a long-term problem. I don't know if this is a short-term problem. I don't know if this is a season-long problem. I don't know if this is something that, you know, a month of downtime would suddenly fix up. I don't know if you know they clinch the division 2 weeks early, having a little bit of a break ends up helping him, you know, get refreshed a little bit. I don't know. I'll be interested to hear what he says about some of that stuff when presented that.
I agree with all that you're saying. I mean, it's worrisome, small picture, big picture, medium picture. You know, year one of a 6-year, $200 million deal for a 28-year-old. We talked about this before, but like when you sign, whether it's Donaldson, Correa, Bryce Harper's 13-year deal with the Phillies, teams do not sign these guys to these massive long-term contracts because they think the last few years are going to be great value.
Right.
You sign a Bryce Harper to a 13-year deal, not because you think year 11, 12, and 13 are going to be worth anything. It's because you want the first 5, 6, 7 years, and the only way to get access to that is to buy the other years. And even with Correa, even with Josh Donaldson on a 4-year deal for that matter, they didn't want year 3 and year 4 of Josh Donaldson. They wanted year 1 and year 2 of Josh Donaldson. With Correa, year 5 and 6 of this thing, when he's 32, 33 years old and he's making $32 million a year, I don't know that he's going to necessarily be worth that or a whole lot more than that. But they were hoping, by access, that was their only way to get access to the first 3 years of the deal, when they were hoping he'd be worth $60 million while making $30 million. Well, that all falls apart, that whole premise, when he's, making $30 million and he's been worth $10 million, if that.
Right.
And
he's not the first guy to sign a free agent contract and stink the first year, right? Trey Turner is,
although it's a little different
in Philadelphia,
because he didn't change teams,
right? Yeah, right. Well, that's true,
right? I mean,
that's true. But,
within the what I would say are mediocre, if you were to remove Carlos Correa's name from the context, he's been roughly an average-ish shortstop.
Sure.
Good defense, below average OPS for the league, but shortstops don't hit.
He's not killing you, right?
Right. Except he's been batting in key spots.
Right.
Like you said, he's the leader of the offense.
Right.
He's been hitting leadoff, or he's been hitting second, or he's been hitting cleanup. He's had a tremendous number of base runners on base in his spots. He's come up, just last night or yesterday, came up with the bases loaded.
Yeah.
Or I guess 2 games ago, came up with the bases loaded and whiffed.
Right.
It's not so much that he's been mediocre. That has hurt, obviously. That he's got a 90 OPS instead of a 130 OPS is hurt.
Sure.
But it's that he's hit 140 with 2 outs and runners in scoring position, or he's grounded into the league high 22 double plays, or just
on top of the below average performance, or at least the average performance for a shortstop. He's been doing it, at the top of the lineup, and he's been coming up more and more in high leverage spots because of that. You get more high leverage spots when you're surrounded by good hitters. And then on top of that, he has done poorly in high leverage spots as well.
Legitimately really bad.
Right.
In high leverage spots. And he was last season too, which is so confusing.
Yeah.
For a guy whose reputation was built on, clutchness. And I know that the trash can banging is always going to loom over that, but even post that, he was quite good in the playoffs, obviously. And so just to finish on this, I looked up the last 50 seasons. So going back to mid 70s, basically. All 27-year-olds and 28-year-olds, guys who had at least 500 plate appearances in both of those seasons. So guys who didn't get hurt, basically, because he's going to end up with 500 plate appearances.
Sure.
And I looked up what are the biggest. Well, yeah, not by your theory of just shut them down until the playoffs. But, I looked up what are the biggest year over year from age 27 to age 28 declines in OPS plus. Because he's gone from, like I said, last year was 138, which, by the way, was the best among all major league shortstops, 138. And that's post trash can. That's on the Twins. That's after signing as a free agent. All the disclaimers. And he's at 91 right now.
Right. So
that's a 47-point drop off in OPS plus from age 27 to 28. That is tied for the 6th biggest drop off by a 28-year-old in the last 50 years. And that's startling. Now, I will say within that, there's a lot of big names because you got to be good.
I was going to say, who are the names around him? I'm trying to figure out when they dropped off for good.
Well, right. So that's what I then looked up. What happened to these guys at age 29 and then beyond? And so I will say I looked up the 10 worst. He's the 11th.
Yeah, he's right in the middle.
Right. Okay. So the 10 worst. And it's like, there's a lot of familiar names. I mean, Chris Davis, Andy Van Slyke, Vernon Wells, Jason Bay, Brooke Jacoby. I mean, some of these are 30 years old or whatever, so people don't know them. But Greg Lazinski, former Philly. So here's the bad news is there's no way to paint that as anything but a negative, obviously. But of the 10 guys who had the biggest drop off prior to Correa, 8 of them essentially bounced back to, if not quite the level they were at, pretty damn close. And so on average, those 10 guys lost 53 points of OPS plus, from age 27 to 28. They gained back 30 points the next year.
Okay.
So, Gary Sheffield and Chris Davis resume being MVP type of guys.
Yeah.
Most of the other guys were, in the 120, 115, 125 range, which would certainly be acceptable for Correa next season or any season, really. There are two guys, Casey McGahee and Larry Sheets, neither of whom were at the level of a lot of these guys.
Right.
Anyway.
I mean, those seem like they had 1 year wonders.
And they were basically
which should be on this list, right?
Yes.
27-year-olds who are 1 year wonders will also be on this list.
Definitely.
Right?
And so the good news is, and I think this sort of jibes with what I would personally believe from Correa, assuming he's somewhat healthy next year, but I would bet on him, whatever he finishes this year with, bouncing back, being closer to the version we've seen prior to this year than the version we've seen this year. But, if he doesn't get all the way back, then you've got 1 year, first year of the deal, which is a negative, and then he's maybe a very good player, but not a superstar player for the rest of the deal. They need him to bounce all the way back. And then within that, the stuff we talked about, strikeouts and, strike zone judgment and swinging through fastballs. Well, that's all stuff that would be sort of suggest that maybe it's not going to be so easy to bounce back, but
potentially.
So yeah, that's where, I don't know if people want more on that. I wrote an article about it on the Athletic yesterday, but so yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff with the lineup that we're talking about I'm not going to say it would be solved, but it would go a long way towards solving it if Carlos Correa just started playing like Carlos Correa.
Yeah. I mean, we need a good right-handed bat at the top of the lineup, and he's supposed to be the good right-handed bat at the top of the lineup, right?
Yes.
I mean, he and Buxton, I mean, a lot of the problems with his team are solved if he and Buxton are not necessarily, prime He and Buxton, just 75% of prime He and Buxton.
Right. Agreed. I'll throw Polanco into that mix too, to some extent.
That's true too.
Which is, obviously he's been banged up and he's not the player that they were, although he's close. Those three guys, they've just gotten nothing from him basically this year.
Yeah.
And that we can break down all the lineup stuff we want, but ultimately so much of it comes down to that. Okay.
Yeah.
So just to finish up a couple other notes here, and then you can go on your way in the streets of Philadelphia.
Giddy up.
Get your first cheesesteak of the day or whatever.
I think we're going to head to Gennaro's right after this, get some hoagies.
Mm-hmm. No. Some hoagies. Get some hoagies.
Did they say a hoagie? Yeah.
Hoagie.
Okay. Water.
Yeah. Can I have a glass of water with my hoagie?
You have a good one, hun.
Yeah. Hun. Not a hun. Yeah.
Yo, go one, hun.
And then John, that's one I didn't. Not John.
John is new since when I lived here. Like in the mid '90s, John was not a thing.
It can be anything. It's like calling someone kid or dude.
It's stuff. It's basically stuff. Yeah.
Oh, this John, he's a
yeah.
Anyway, John is a John. Really,
exactly. Yeah.
So we talked about the rotation a little bit. I will say we were texting. Was it yesterday about Bailey Ober?
Oh yeah, we should. Yeah.
It's funny that we got enough of each other at this point. Like, why are we texting?
We do independently come up with stuff about the same sort of stuff.
But I just mean, like, we're doing 6 hours a week on recorded shows talking about the Twins. Yeah. And yet John's like texting me like, what do you think about Ober? He's kind of, and it's like, yeah, I guess we can't help ourselves. But Bailey Ober, the point John was raising, which is certainly a decent one, which is Bailey Ober struggled a little bit of late after being so consistently solid for the first 3 months he was up in the majors, basically. Basically
up until the point where we decided to point out how consistently good he's been.
Yeah, you didn't knock on wood that day, so that probably ruined it.
That's it.
As a consistent wood knocker that you are, I was surprised that you didn't. But he struggled, and that kind of goes with what I was talking about with the rotation, which is it's great to have a season totals of a very good rotation. But if you get there and two of the guys are hurt or one of them's on fumes, you're not putting out a representation of that rotation, which is a hard sentence to say, that is kind of up to the standard that the whole season. And that's the worry with Joe Ryan right now. I would say that's the worry with Ober right now. John's question that you raised, which is one we asked Baldelli about maybe 2 weeks ago, I think, was, Bailey Ober has, in the grand scheme of things, barely thrown any innings for his whole career.
Right.
He was injured in the minors. He was brought along very carefully the past couple of years, even in the majors. They often limited him in starts, between starts, all that. He passed his career high for total innings because he also threw some to begin the season at AAA. like a month ago or 3 weeks ago, something like that. His career high was like 110 innings or something.
109. Yeah.
Okay. And now he's at, I don't know what.
126.2.
Is that including AAA?
126.1. Yeah, that's including the AAA.
Okay. And so, there's two ways to discuss this, which is one is what we're seeing from him where he's struggling a little bit of late, a result of him being on fumes just from a workload standpoint.
Right.
And then related to that, but sort of separate from that is, let's say it's not related to that. Will they then try to limit his workload down the stretch, not necessarily to get him back on track, although that's an option too, but to just kind of not have him running on fumes at the end of the season, even if you don't think that's the reason he's running on fumes now, because now there's only
you don't usually let somebody who's career high in innings have 110 innings in their career pitch 170 innings at any point in there, that in any season. There's going to be a step there someplace in between, because you're trying to protect that arm, especially an arm that that's going to be under team control for another 3 years. 3 or 4 years, right?
That you've been careful with up until this point,
right?
Obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And especially guys who's had an injury history, which Bailey Ober has had.
So there's 45 games left, but he just started yesterday, so it'll be another 4 games before he were to start again. Yeah, right. He essentially would have 8 starts left.
8 or 9. Yep.
They just kept him on a normal-ish rotation. He'd basically have 8 starts left. Now, 5 innings a start, let's say, maybe that's on the low side, but let's count 40. That would get him. What did you say he was at? 126. So that would get him
so he'd be at 166.
Now, is jumping from 110 to 166? That's not that crazy to me, I don't think. It's not ideal, obviously, but at some point you got to jump a guy somewhere. I think going from 110 to 210 would certainly, we could both agree that that's crazy.
Well, sure, that's crazy, right?
Going to from 110 to 150 or 160 is perfectly reasonable. Maybe they're pushing
150 is reasonable, right?
I will say, so we asked Baldelli about this a few weeks ago when he was nearing the career high of 110 or 109, whatever you said, and we asked, I forget who asked, but somebody said, like, are you guys planning to shut him down or skip his starts, or I don't know, option him back to AAA for 2 weeks or whatever? And Baldelli said at the time, which was maybe late last month, he said, no, we're not going to do any of that. If he can pitch, he's going to pitch. Now what we might do is, if he's at 84 pitches through 5, we might not send him out for the 6th as often as we would, or if there's an off day or 2 in a week, we might use that to push him to the back of the rotation instead of just keeping him on his normal schedule. And if you do that once or twice, all of a sudden he's at 159 innings instead of 166 innings for the season. And it's less of a concern. But my bigger concern isn't so much with what he ends up with, because I think that's such an inexact science that we don't really know. It's, where's he at right now? Like from a stuff standpoint, from a, getting knocked around by mediocre lineup standpoint. Sure. And I don't know that his stuff really looks any worse. I'd have to dig more into it. To me, I know he has said after some of these poor outings, including I saw a quote after the one against the Tigers just now, where he's like, I feel great physically. Like I honestly feel at my best physically. Now that doesn't mean that's true necessarily, but he's pretty consistently said that. And so he's one of these key figures down the stretch here, not only because they're going to need him to win the division, but because 3 weeks ago we would have been talking about him starting a playoff game, potentially over some other guys. Right.
I mean, we actually did just have that conversation on Wednesday's
and now
page.
That's like, well, that's out the window now. But the problem is you can't do that anymore. If Joe Ryan's out the window and Bailey Ober's out the window, there can be no exiting windows anymore.
I will be interested to see what happens if Joe Ryan comes back from this strained groin or whatever in 15, 20 days, something like that. I don't know exactly. I mean, it could be that strained groin, they're going to take the cautious 4 to 6 week approach or something like that. Well, then you're pressing up against the postseason there, right? And they're going to want to see something from him at that point.
He was throwing on the homestand. I saw him.
Okay, well, so you don't anticipate that sort of a stay. But when he comes back, if Keuchel is continues to be effective, and we'll see starting again tonight. We did see his first start this week.
Yeah,
we
we'd
got
probably
about what we expected, I think, from
Yes.
Dallas
a
Keuchel.
lot of ground balls, no strikeouts. Be very difficult to analyze, but effective start.
But now he's
basically.
going to be trying to do it in versus the Philadelphia Phillies lineup.
Yeah.
But they've got some left-handers in that lineup, so maybe that's not a bad place for him to start.
So yeah, I mean, I think almost by default now, you know who your 3 playoff starters would be.
Yeah.
Certainly if the playoffs started today.
Well,
now,
sure,
the order of that is to be determined, but it's going to be Gray, Lopez, and Maeda.
Yeah,
And
you would
even
think
that
so.
has, some issues to it, which is Maeda has been fantastic. I do not want to undersell how great he's been, but do we know how he's going to look 50 more innings from now? You know what I mean? Sonny Gray has certainly been
he's gotten a fair amount of rest this year.
Well, that's true, but I've gotten 20 years of rest. If you asked me to go run across the street, I couldn't do it. Very similar to Kenta Maeda, Aaron Gleeman and Kenta Maeda. Gray has certainly not been sharp now for several months. He's had some decent starts of late where he's really pounded the strike zone and tried to make adjustments.
Yes, he's not walking as many people,
which I give him credit for.
Yes, I
but
agree.
Just in general, think of what we saw from him early in the season and what we've seen from him since, June, let's say. If anything, I would maybe have the most confidence in Maeda just because he's been their best starter for the last, month or whatever. But Lopez, who you think where Lopez was at in May, when he was the one who was struggling, but he's really been, not perfect by any means, but he seems to be the strongest at this point, other than Maeda.
Which is worth pointing out regarding Ober as well. Like every pitcher throughout the 6-month season ends up going through some ups and downs. And when they're in their downs, we tend to compare them to the ups that they had previously attained. We're thinking that was going to last forever. Bailey Ober, as a young pitcher and as somebody who, it certainly he would not be the first guy come late July, early August to have a little bit of a period where he's less effective because he's not quite as strong, no matter how strong he thinks he's feeling. The arm just isn't there. The only additional ingredient with Ober is the fact that he's already pitched 20 more innings than he's ever pitched before, and that raises the level. I mean, otherwise if he had thrown 160 innings 2 years ago, I'd be like, he's just going through a little something right now. He's going to have to figure it out or something. We'll give him some time to bounce back. But the fact that he's already 20 innings over his previous high and he's still got 8 starts left makes it a little worrisome as to what at the very least, what his role would be in the postseason if they ever get all those innings are just in the regular season. If you're counting on it for postseason stuff, that's another, hopefully 3-4 innings.
No, I think you're right that pitchers are allowed to have ups and downs during a season too. I think the difference is, we treat it, they're viewed as more like delicate flowers than hitters. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Where with pitchers, there's such injury risk and you can track velocity and you can track strikeout rate. Whereas with hitters, and when we talked about with Correa, you can look into it obviously, but a hitter will have a bad stretch and it's he's probably fine. He says he's healthy. He's probably fine. Just had a bad few weeks. With a pitcher, you rarely hear that. With a pitcher, it's they've been struggling. Why have they been struggling?
Well, it's a little like NFL games versus Major League Baseball games, right? You've only got 30 starts as a pitcher. You don't have 160 games to free you, right? You go through a 5-game stretch of, the truth is that Bailey Ober's really only had about a bad 3-game stretch right now. And even the middle one wasn't that bad. He's had 2 clunkers out of his last 3. Before that, 6 innings, 3 runs. That looked fine, right?
And his is what I'm saying is his poor stretch right now is not any different. It's probably less bad actually than Lopez's poor stretch in May.
Right.
But it's just that Lopez, although he does have some injury issues in his past too,
that's
but
true too.
He threw 200 innings last year and all that stuff. Whereas with Ober, there's more dots to connect if you kind of want to go down that path. So we'll see. I mean, I would put him as one of the bigger keys. Obviously Correa, huge key.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of them, but I think on the pitching side, Ober is a huge key. But and then we can finish. We won't even talk about the bullpen. We'll save that for another day.
Okay.
Here's 2 notes to finish with. Number 1, you and I will be squaring off 1 week from today. We will have just finished actually at this time 1 week from today, Friday, August 18th. What, 8:30? Is that when they do it?
8:15.
8:15 on the Power Trip Morning Show on KFAN.
Download that iHeartRadio app.
Yeah,
You can listen live.
sure. Or they do it on YouTube. Unfortunately, we'll be on camera for that. John and I will be squaring off in the initials tournament, the Invitational.
Right.
We are 2 of the 5 competitors, along with Tom Pelissero, Elizabeth
Tommy
Reese,
Olsen
and Tommy Olsen. Thank you.
Yeah.
I haven't been scouting my opponents yet. I'm going to do that this week. And I've already said, I tried to get John to agree to this too, but he's hesitant. So I'll just say it. If I lose to John, I'm done with the initials. I will retire from the initials forever.
How about if you win?
I might also retire.
You might also want to go out on a high note.
Yeah.
And what if you just don't place either way? Maybe retire.
Yeah. You've cracked the code there. So yeah, tune into that next Friday at would you say 8:15 a.m.
Yes.
They'll stream it on YouTube and iHeart and whatever
That's
else. Right. I am expecting neither of us to win realistically. Like I think collectively we combined we have less than 50% chance to win is how I would put it.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate.
I mean, we're 2 out of 5.
The truth, exactly. The truth is that it tends to be kind of a random thing. Sometimes, I mean, certainly there are people who have shown that they have a track record of winning, but it also has enough randomness to it that you don't know exactly going into it how people are going to do.
Well, I've played twice. Right. The first time I set the all-time record for most points in a debut, and I won easily. And the second time I scored 1 point and lost in a blowout to John Creasel. Right. Well, that's exactly what you're saying.
That's exactly right.
Yep. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is, let's see, 3 days from now. So Tuesday will be the 12th anniversary of the existence of this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Which on August 15th, 2011, John and I went to the Park Tavern in St. Louis Park.
Yeah.
And we recorded a show. It was that night. Delman Young had just been traded from the Twins to the Tigers. And Jim Thome had just hit his 600th career home run for what was a very bad Twins team in 2011.
Yeah.
So we picked a perfect time to start recording podcasts.
Yes, we did.
In August of a 95 loss season or whatever it was.
But at least I wonder though if there weren't like 2 big events that day whether we would have actually done it.
Yeah, I don't remember if we had already planned to do it or not.
I think we had already planned to do it. But I looked through there's an email record of us corresponding about this, and we go through it because it took us a long time to I remember it taking us, quote, a long time to figure out the technical piece. The truth is that it took me a couple weeks to kind of figure out the technical piece of how to record and stuff. But then ultimately it came down to like, I really wanted to make sure we did it in public, and you really wanted to not make sure we did it in public. and I think it took a while to agree to actually do it in public. I wonder if we would have actually done it in public if we didn't have something that we were both excited to talk about with Delman Young and Thome.
Well, that's remained true. I really, the tortoise and the hare on that one. We did like 300 episodes in public. Yeah. We now do them all in private. That's right. So I won that one.
You eventually won that one. Yeah.
I rope-a-doped you. I took 300 shots. Tired you out.
Yeah, that's fine.
Threw in COVID in there. I guess COVID really won.
I got at about 600 or 650. We're going to switch back.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's the way it's going.
Yeah, wish you luck with that.
Enjoy the text from Phil Miller about me buying him beers this weekend, by the way.
Yeah. That's fine. Another guest. I'm happy to buy a beer. So yeah, 12th anniversary of the show. It was initially called, John wanted to call it the baseball pitcher.
Yeah.
Because of the double meaning.
Did we actually talk about that on the podcast? I can't remember if we just talked about that afterwards.
Yeah, I think it was Nick. I don't remember. But
as I recall, that idea was pretty much nixed immediately.
Yeah. Well,
I don't remember how many episodes we were in before we started calling it Gleeman and the Geek. It might have just been one.
It's a good name, though.
It worked out okay.
Relatively. Yeah. Given the lack of forethought and effort that went into getting on that name.
Yeah.
It's a good,
Given 2 G's.
Yeah. It's got alliterative. Could have been Geek and the Gleeman.
Yeah. We used the 2Gs, and then we ended up paying 2Gs the first after the first year for the bar tabs.
I wish only 2Gs. How about at the 650 episode mark, maybe we'll flip and you can be the first Geek and Gleeman.
Oh, maybe. That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, that would throw people off. Anyway, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone. Thank you too, John, but not really.
You're welcome.
You get paid, so I don't need to thank you. But to thank everyone for listening. If you're one of the few, the proud, I don't know how many we had for the first episode. It was a lot more than we expected. I know that.
I think it was. I think we got like 3,000 on that first episode.
Yeah, and we were hoping for like 200.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Like I honestly thought our like pie in the sky goal was 500.
Yeah. Right.
Because I remember saying,
yeah,
well, if we were on stage somewhere and there were 500 people listening in the audience, that would seem like a really big deal.
Yeah.
Turns out we've also done that now a few times.
Yes,
but,
that's it too, yeah.
So if you're someone who, for whatever reason, listened on August probably 16th, 2011, and have continued to listen, which just seems like a Stockholm syndrome type situation at this stage. But thank you. Good. And even if this is your first episode or you've been listening for X number of episodes, thank you for I don't know. I always say thank you for turning this into something.
Yeah.
We didn't know what it was going to be. We didn't know if it would be 3 episodes or 1,000 episodes. I certainly never would have guessed even this many episodes. We certainly never expected it to become a thing that could actually be a job or a source of revenue.
Right.
And that we could expand into basically 3 days a week during the season and have sort of an offshoot, which is patreon.com/Gleeman, obviously. And so all of that is, it's because of us. We're being stubborn. We won't stop talking about the Twins, but really it's because, there was an actual audience for it, which we were never quite sure of. And I will never cease to be amazed. When I log into our, stat tracking thing for the podcast, or I go on Patreon and check how many subscribers there are. I'm never not amazed. No, we're like 800 episodes into this thing, and I look on a Wednesday for the Friday episode and it's like, 12,000 people have listened to this already. Or I go on Patreon and it's like, yeah, we're up to almost 3,800 subscribers. And it's like that. If you would have told me that night at the Park Tavern, first of all, I would have said, what's Patreon? Second of all, I'd be like, what do you mean we're still doing this in 12 years?
Right.
And then third, I'd be like, I think you got to be lying to me. There's no way that 12, 13, sometimes more thousand Twins fans are listening to these two idiots bicker with each other about the Minnesota Twins. But when I have people talk to me a little bit about this podcast, sometimes they'll be like, it's got to blow you away that one of the top 5 podcasts in a baseball podcast in America is about the Twins. Like it's just about the Twins, right? Like that is crazy. Are you proud of that? And my answer is, well, yeah, I mean, we're proud of it, but you're missing the bigger point. And that is that there's enough Twins fans to support to make the number one podcast like that. The amazing part about that stat is the crowd, not the hosts. Right.
Right.
I agree.
And that there's so much passion around Twins fan around in-depth, an in-depth dissection of a single team that it can launch it up to the, levels of national baseball podcasts that are, corporately funded with big names making big salaries. That is the amazing part. And that is about this crowd, this community that has developed around this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think just to finish, we'll end here, but like we do even now hear from media outlets locally who are like, well, we don't really do the Twins because like, is there an audience for it and all this?
Right.
And I even know when I started at The Athletic, my editor, Zach Pierce, who's great. The first time I said to him, hey, I'd like to do a top 10 players the Twins have left unprotected from the Rule 5 draft and the risk they have of losing them. And he went, well, who's going to read that? And I literally said to him, let me do it once. And one of us is going to be wrong. And the one who's right can determine whether it gets written next year also. Oh. And by about 9:30 a.m. the next morning, after it got published, he said, well, I guess you're going to do one of these every year. And that's how I think about the podcast.
Yeah, that's it.
Which is, we hear from people all the time. Some of them are podcasters or radio shows or television or whatever. And it's like, yeah, we talk about the Twins a little bit, but there just isn't the audience for it. And I like to, selfishly, I would love to think that it's our skill and excellent broadcasting, but no, I mean, yeah, maybe, but probably not. I think we make a real effort. We enjoy doing it.
Right.
We generally like talking to each other. I think John is lessening that.
I think we believe in the content.
And we believe, yes. And very rarely / maybe never are we just saying something to try to get a reaction. And I think not taking that approach has been very helpful from a long-term perspective. Is like, we don't slap these crazy headlines on it, or you won't believe what John Bonus said on this show about whatever, because we're not looking for a quick score. We're not looking for an influx on one episode. We're trying to build this thing that we can be relied on to provide a certain type of discussion, a certain type of coverage. And I think, it's been rewarding to be able to say, maybe we're a unicorn in this sense, but guess what? We can get 13,000 people to listen to two doofuses banter about the Twins for an hour and a half once a week. And anybody claiming that that's not doable, we know it is. And anybody claiming, that interest in the Twins is low, or, basing it off attendance or whatever it is. And we've heard all of it every season. Why do I watch this team? Why do I, whatever, for better or worse, we're drawing some episodes, 15,000 people to listen to it. And that blows my mind. And it makes me feel good. Not from the sense that I think we're amazing or anything. I don't have nearly the self-esteem to ever say that and really mean it. But from the sense that if you put out a product that you believe in and you tailor it in a way that you think is valuable, or at least would be something that you yourself would be interested in consuming as a listener, it can pay off over the long haul. Now, like you joked about, it took us a while to build something where we weren't losing money on it every year, thousands of dollars in bar tabs and everything.
Yeah.
But I feel extra good about sitting here 12 years in because of the way we kind of gradually built it, and rarely, if ever, kind of strayed from the, kind of the goal from the start, which was, we want this to just mostly be, now we have guests and stuff once in a while, but we mostly want this to just be two guys having a conversation that they might have over a pitcher of beers at Park Tavern on a whatever night. And a hot take doesn't do you any good in that context, because the person sitting across from you just goes, well, that's stupid. What are you talking about? And a hot take doesn't necessarily do you good in this context either. So I thank you guys for proof of concept on that as a theory for building a podcast.
We should thank our sponsors, Harry's and RotoWire and HelloFresh and Game time, right? I will. I don't. I'm sure that if you've gotten to the end of this podcast, the event has already happened. But if you're in Philadelphia going to the game on Saturday, feel free to show up a little bit early at Chickies and Pete's. We're going to be there from 3 to 6. I think we got like 40 people at least have already signed up to be there. We're going to have a good crowd of Twins fans there celebrating, playing in Philadelphia for the weekend. If you see me around the ballpark, be sure to say something. Follow me on Twitter, because we all probably going to be doing some post game or pre game announcements. Hey, we're going to be such and such. Check out some of the dive bars around Philadelphia if you want to try and keep up with Chris.
You can be the next person that Bonus forces me to buy half of a beer for after a game.
We've actually had a great time in Philadelphia, running into lots of listeners that have the next family come in after the Detroit game yesterday. A couple of other guys Thursday. We've run into so many good. I will tell you this, Aaron. I was surprised how few Twins fans are at those Tigers games.
Yeah.
I guess I shouldn't be, because it was a midweek game in Detroit.
And there's no novelty to it. They play the Tigers a billion times a year for every year.
We saw
like
a lot
in Philly or whatever.
I am used to going to stadiums where there's more Twins fans. This was probably the least I've seen in terms of Twins fans at a away game. And I'm expecting a lot more in Philadelphia, actually. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe.
God love Detroit, but you rarely hear someone go, it'd be a good summer vacation. Let's do a weekend in Detroit.
Yeah, well, I
weekend
will say
Detroit.
this: I'm going to go there more. I'm going to go there again. I like a good It's a good stadium. It's got a lot of good stuff around it. Bars and places, things to do before and after the game. Good good pizza, the Detroit style pizza. I've become a fan of. Good beers around there. I mean, it checks a lot of boxes. In the city, it checks a lot of boxes for me, and I think it's edging towards the top 10 of the Major League Baseball stadiums that I've been to. Edging towards it. I'm not sure if it's in it, but I think it's in the 10 to 15, 11 to 15 range right now.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm surprised. I'm surprised I liked it because I avoided going there and I kind of didn't want to like it because I loved Tiger Stadium so much. And when Tiger Stadium went away, I was a little bitter. But yeah, Detroit works. And the fans there were great. People we talked to were fantastic. So it was good.
Okay. We'll be back Monday on the Patreon, exclusively for Patreon subscribers. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. New episodes cost you $1. You get access to all the previous episodes, the entire archive, totally free. And if you sign up now and you ride with us through the end of the season and quote unquote into the playoffs, it might cost you, I don't know, $10.
Yeah,
$12, something like that total. And
you'll get a full breakdown of the bonus experience in Philadelphia, watching the Twins sweep the Phillies.
Playing off what you said a minute ago, if you are hearing these words right now that I'm saying, I can almost guarantee you will enjoy the Patreon podcast, because having made it this far into this podcast tells me you are the type of brain and person that will enjoy hearing more of us speak. So patreon.com/Gleeman. If not, we'll talk to you guys next Friday.
Gleeman